Your Humanities Half Hour is brought to you by the Northern Marianas Humanities Council.
Hapaday, Zantiro. Welcome to Your Humanities Half Hour. I'm Catherine Perry, and today our guest is former CNMI Supreme Court Chief Justice Jose S. Dela Cruz. Buenas, Justice Dela Cruz, and thanks for joining us via Zoom today.
Thank you. And this is my first experience with the Zoom app. The other application that I was using with the other talk show people have been a different one, and I thought it's Zoom, but I'm wrong on that.
No problem.
I had to learn how to use it. It's good to see you, Catherine.
Yeah, good to see you too, all the way there in Missouri, correct? How have you been doing?
No, it's not Missouri. Oh. I'm in the deep South.
Mississippi.
I'm in Mississippi.
Yeah. What have you been up to since your retirement?
Well, since I retired quite a long time ago, actually, I have been moving around different places. The first was in Hawaii, where my three kids were going to grade school and in high school. Roxanne went to a high school there at St. Francis. I don't know if that school's still on. Then my daughter Renee was with her. And then my last one is Rika, who is in Saipan now doing her field work for her studies in public health. And she also went to school in Honolulu, graduated from there. She went to Punahou, by the way. So it's one of those radical schools, I think. She has a tendency to lecture me now. Because instead of me proofreading her paper, she now proofreads mine.
All right. A legacy. Well, we're here to talk about two of your books today. The first being From Colonialism to Self-Government in the Northern Marianas Experience. And the second book is The Fundamental Issues Affecting the Northern Mariana Islands. What inspired you to write these books, and what are they about essentially?
I used to write, after I retired, I used to write letters to the editor. And some are opinion pieces with the local papers, the Marianas Variety, the Saipan Tribune. And after a couple of years, my wife said, you write a lot of these letters, but they tend to go by the wayside. And I said, what do you mean? And she said, well, might want to write something that's more permanent. Like what? And he said, a book. And I didn't know what books he wanted me to write. So I thought I could write a novel. I mean, I read a couple of books from some of the books by Hemingway and other people. And I decided maybe I should try my hand at writing a novel. So I started the Northern Marianas book as if it were a novel. And that's the reason for the narrative character when I started that book. I was trying to tell the story of the Northern Marianas from a historical fiction type of approach. And as I proceeded writing that, I began telling the story of the experience of our people back in the 50s and 60s after the war. I first attended Mount Carmel, started out with the preschool, the kindergarten at the nuns convent in Canoa, and then where the Spanish nuns were.
Yes.
And then moved on to Mount Carmel, great school next to the church there, the cathedral now. And so there were a lot of these Spanish nuns, and they were teaching us English, and they themselves were learning how to speak English. Which was sort of funny and unusual, but they were trying their best to do so. And a lot of times, here we are, who were born into a household, all of us actually in the Northern Marianas back in the 50s and 60s, couldn't speak a word of English, except some of the pidgin English that we Chamorros and Carolinians would hear from other people, primarily from the people working for the naval government during the naval administration, because as you know, or probably would remember, or at least your mom, back in the 50s and 60s, up to 1962, the Northern Marianas was administered by the naval administration. And the reason for that is because under the trusteeship agreement for the Trust Territory Islands, the people of Micronesia, the Marshalls, Carolines, both Western and Eastern, FSM, which consists of Chuk and Yap, and Pohnpei and Kosrae, and then of course Palau, the Republic of Palau now. We were all lumped in as part of the Japanese mandated islands that were before the war controlled by Japan. And after the war, of course, the United States decided that it wants to have control over these islands. But the approach in the United Nations was basically to put these islands together as a trust territory under trusteeship, pursuant to the trusteeship charter, the trusteeship agreement that was entered into. But with respect to the Micronesian trusteeship, it was a strategic trust, meaning that the United States could use it for military purposes. And they did, for Saipan at least, and also for Kwajalein in the Marshalls. And so they, I don't know if I'm taking too long on this. Maybe I'll move on. That's the trusteeship. And so until 1962, after Kennedy became president, he decided that, these islands should begin preparation for their future political status. And at that point, the Navy moved out. Of course, NTTU was a CIA operation in the Northern Marianas. It was supposed to be a secret, but I guess everybody knew about it even then. Training nationalist Chinese guerrillas in Saipan on Marpi of all places, because you could lock it off and put a sign that says off limit. And so that was the situation as a trusteeship. And moving back to Mount Carmel again in the 50s and 60s, none of us could speak English. We were just learning how to get acculturated again to another administration that tells us what to do. And that was life back then, which consisted of fishing and farming. Mm-hmm. And then to supplement their meager salaries with the naval administration. Most of them were hired by the Navy, or subsequently the NTTU, the Naval Technical Training Unit. And they were the people that, a lot of them were Catholics, those CIA people. So I think we got along with them. And a number of the children also go to Mount Carmel School. And it wasn't one or two buses that I see coming over to Mount Carmel from Capitol Hill, where they built all those houses for their staff. And so I decided to take a peek at that in the book and mention it because that's part of our history back in the 50s and 60s. I also mentioned.
Oh, yeah. Sorry. Go ahead.
I also mentioned that there's the public school system, the elementary school that at that time we youngsters called the Escuelan Rai, the King's School, basically, but it's the public school because we have no other term to use for a public school, and we call it Escuelan Rai. And my two older brothers went to what is now the William S. Regis Elementary School. And so on. So we would walk to school back and forth and all that throughout the years. And then in that first part of the book, I tried to mention some of the customs we have, like being on the farm and the ranch when I was a kid with my grandparents, and then seeing them how they make tuba, for example, the liquor that the locals use from coconut saplings that they catch in one of those bamboo jars. And
Justice, if I could, what was the court system like when you began practicing law in 1974? Must have been pretty rudimentary.
Yeah, quite rudimentary. Let me go back to law school and mention that, because one of my best friends, in fact, across the hall, the dorm where I stayed for the first year, a very close friend of mine who's now a law professor at the University of Virginia Law School in Charlottesville. He graduated first in our class, and one day he looked at me and said, "What do you think of that evidence law exam?" And I said, "Well, I don't know." And he looked at me and he said, "I think I flunked it." And I said, "You flunked it? If you flunk it,
I'm in trouble."
I'm dead." He ended up clerking of the United States Supreme Court about a year later.
Wow.
So I said, "Well, George, well, you threw me off there for a while." So anyway, I mentioned George Rutherglen because one of the first things he asked me, he said, "What are you doing here?" And I said, "What do you mean?" I said, "Why are you studying law?" And I said, Why not?" And he said, "Well, are you going to practice law when you go back to your island?" And he said, "Yeah." And I said, "Well, what are you going to practice between two coconut trees on a hammock?" And then he said, I said, yeah. And I'll represent you, George, for a coconut falling on your head and cracking your head. And I'll do my best to get you some damages. So after law school back in 1974, I started practicing with the Micronesian Legal Services Corporation. And at that time, the court system is basically the system created by the trust territory government. And as you may know, the trust territory government is really a creation of the United States government, and administratively was under the administrative wings of the Department of Interior. So the Secretary of Interior appoints the justices for the Trust Territory High Court, which acts both as a trial court, where you take evidence and all that, and an appellate court, which reviews the decision of the trial court. So there are 4 justices on that court. So the judge that deprived the case, his decision, if there's an appeal from that decision, would be reviewed on appeal by the Trust Territory High Court. And that's it. That's a one-shot appeal, and whatever comes out, comes out. And so I started, me and former Lieutenant Governor Justice Borja started practicing together at that office, the Marianas District Office. And it's a basic trust territory law, but before that, it was really a laid-back type of practice for the lawyers that came before us. It consisted mostly of the people from the Trust Territory Attorney General's office, who also manned the district attorney's office in the police department. And they also set up a public defender's office. One of whose more famous alumni there was the late Roger St. Pierre, who's known for his vigorous defense of criminal defendants, and was one of the first people who also come up with acquittals for some of his clients who were smoking marijuana. And that was a big thing. And so Roger became sort of like a legend in the community for his work in that. And then the Micronesian Legal Services people are the rabble rousers, headed by a very flamboyant, I don't know if you ever heard of Ted Mitchell.
Yeah.
Ted Mitchell is a graduate
Long-time
of Harvard
attorney
Law.
here. Yeah.
Yeah, very long-time attorney. Very smart. I view him as one of the brightest people that I've ever met, including George Rutherglen, my friend. And he is very loquacious, but he's also rambunctious and bombastic at times. And if you're not his friend, you're his enemy, and you better watch out, because, boy, I tell you. And the courts had to also be on its toes after that point, because a number of them were coming out of young lawyers wanted to do justice in the world. And so you have people from Stanford, Columbia, Georgetown, like Justice Borja, and a host of other people from Tulane next door here, and all those places. So young guys, 5-6 years out of law school, running programs for the Legal Services Corporation through the Office of Economic Opportunity. Go ahead.
Well, we're chatting today with former CNMI Supreme Court Chief Justice Jose S. Dela Cruz about his two publications about the CNMI and its history, and also life and culture back in the older days. And we'll be back with more after this break.
Did you know that you can donate up to $5,000 to the Humanities Council through the CNMI Education Tax Credit Program? Donations from individuals and corporations qualify and can be used to offset your local wage and salary tax, BGRT, and earnings tax. Call our office at 235-4785 to see how you can support humanities programs in our community and obtain a tax credit for your donation. Sizuus Maasi, Olomai, and thank you.
Welcome back to your Humanities Half Hour. We are chatting today with former CNMI Supreme Court Chief Justice Dela Cruz. Justice Dela Cruz, could you explain to us what makes the Commonwealth unique in terms of its covenant with the U.S., and also a little bit about how the insular cases play into that?
When the United States was established in 1789 through the United States Constitution, there were 13 original colonies, and the original colonies ratified this, and they became the first 13 states of the Union. The name of our country is the United States of America. Okay, we're not a state. The territories are not states. That's why we don't vote for the president. That's why we don't have any representation in the US Congress, except through the delegate that we send to the Congress. And going back to the territorial clause and the insular cases, the Supreme Court ended up saying, well, you know, the US Constitution does not apply, and they use a Latin phrase, ex proprio vigore, which means of its own force. In other words, in the states, the Constitution, of course, applies of its own force because that's what the Constitution was intended for. The Constitution was drafted to apply to the states. And the territories are basically seen as properties of the United States, subject to regulation disposition by the states. And interestingly enough, at this moment in time, the United States Supreme Court is reviewing a case that involves Puerto Rico. A person moved from, I'm not sure, Illinois, and was receiving supplemental security income in the 50 states and in Illinois, and moved to Puerto Rico. By the way, and let me explain that to you later on with respect to, because we get SSI in the Northern Marianas.
I thank you for agreeing to address this topic more thoroughly in a future interview, right? I have you on
really
record.
It's interesting. I'll do that. I'll do it in another interview because it itself could take more than 40 minutes to actually discuss this. And it's the first time, and that's the reason why the Northern Marianas entry into the United States through the covenant is unique, because the U.S. Congress, in passing the Congressional Joint Resolution, which is a public law, the U.S. Congress agreed to let go of its plenary powers with respect to the Northern Marianas, but felt that there are provisions in the United States Constitution that should be made applicable to the Northern Marianas. That's why when officials of the Northern Marianas government take their oath of office, basically what they're saying is, the oath says basically, I swear to uphold and defend the Constitution and laws of the Northern Mariana Islands and the applicable provisions of the U.S. Constitution. So, laws and treaties of the United States that are made applicable to the Northern Marianas. And I took that oath of office when I became a judge of the Supreme Court, and I assumed that that's the way it should be. It requires me to use that oath, but I never really dug into it and to find out what exactly are those provisions. So in my second book, I took the time to actually spell them all out and bring out of, like digging into a mangrove crab hole, bring them all so we know how many crabs do we have. And what kind are they? You know, they have these customs rules and regulations, the so-called Head Note 3A, that exempts the Northern Marianas and the other territories from paying duties when entering into products into the United States. That's why the garment industry set up shop in the Northern Marianas, because it was a loophole for them to operate in the Northern Marianas. I think they get two or three benefits as a result of doing that. Number one, they don't have to pay duties. They are exempted from the quota restriction for textile products from foreign country. They don't have to comply with that if it's a product of the Northern Marianas. So they literally transplanted most of their manufacturing operations to the Northern Marianas.
And at that time, we controlled our own minimum wage, which was much lower.
Exactly. That's the third one. The third one, they don't have to pay and so they have always been lobbying that, you know, this and that and all that. And so it's a tricky question, because on one hand, of course, the Northern Marianas, the standard of living, the economy of the Northern Marianas is not on par with New York, for example. You can't say a little island with 44 square miles of land is able to compete with a place like Philadelphia or New York and all that, where they have all the industries and that kind of stuff. But anyway,
speaking of industries, what industry, that's part of what you cover in your second book, The Fundamental Issues Facing the Northern Mariana Islands. What industries do you feel are viable? You talk also about the gaming industry. Do you think the gaming industry is viable, or what other industries do you feel we should be exploring?
It's really up to the people to make that decision. I don't think the casino industry, like the garment industry, is a good fit for the Northern Marianas. I don't think it's something that and the garment industry, when the time came, just left the islands without batting an eye. I mean, they all up and left. They were raking in, and I always love to use the word rake. I mean, basically because that's what they were doing, raking in $1 billion annually. Can you imagine that? And of that $1 billion that they were raking in terms of manufactured products that were imported into the United States, what does the Northern Marianas get? Well, 36 million. Of course, it's a pretty substantial sum in terms of comparison with respect to the overall revenue of the Northern Marianas, but it is quite small. It could be easily getting like 50 million or 75 million maybe out of that $1 billion with all those zeros in that billion.
Is there any industry that you think the CNMI should be exploring to supplement tourism?
Self-government goes hand in hand with what we can produce. I mean, you cannot sustain self-government without any revenue, right? Otherwise, we'll be forever dependent on federal government largesse on the islands. Are we going to be like that? I mean, we can't really operate a government. That's not self-government. That's a government that's being controlled. I mean, the states don't wait until they have their own industries. What is very important, what's very, we must continue to develop and entice is the visitor industry, of course. I mean, that's a good fit for the Northern Marianas. Okay, number one. Number two is, I'm suggesting, I mean, let's do something more about the fishing and the local farming and local fishing. We don't have too much land, but we can do a fairly substantial amount of fishing and farming. For the military in Guam, for example, and with respect to fishing, maybe for export to Japan, where they love fish. But aside from that, with the any aspect of the technology industry that could maybe be done in the CNMI, that could be reviewed and seen as appropriate, and where we train our people to be able to be gainfully employed. And so in my book, I'm recommending that instead of a task force composed of people from the Northern Marianas, I'm suggesting that we have an economic group consisting of professional economists and business executives that would come and advise us from the outside what is good for the Northern, because usually when you have people coming in, they'll say, well, you get, this is not the way you should do things and all that. And then we listen to them. We've relied too much on our business leaders, and I'm not putting them down. We got to get new ideas from outside.
Who would you recommend read your books, and what ultimately would you like to have come from having published them?
Well, the members of the legislature, I think, is really very important. I think they should read that book. They should read that book and read it thoroughly. Both books, actually, because the first book gives you a perspective of what we went through colonization for almost 400 years, about 400 years of colonization. We never learned how to govern ourselves because we never govern ourselves. You know what I mean? That may be the reason why we're having problems every now and then with how to govern ourselves, So I would recommend that government officials read that book, past, present, and future. I would also recommend that business leaders read that book and critique it. I'm ready to be criticized. I don't have the answer to everything in this world. I have my own opinions and my own ideas of how things should work. Maybe some of them are good, but some of them are probably bad, and I stand corrected if I made a mistake. The other thing is we need to educate our people. I was in Saipan until last December last year, and I stayed there for a good 6 to 7 months. I was thinking that we need to do something to improve our islands. And we cannot continue doing this thing. I mean, one of the things that really bothers me about the way we practice politics in the islands is that we take it personally. And I had always thought that the idea of having political parties is to have the best possible candidate come up and explain to himself or herself what should be done to improve the economy of the islands. The other thing is the need for a return to the code of ethics for government employees. For too long, there's a game going on between the political branches. And when they're from the same party, they have a tendency to do things that sometimes are not too good as a matter of public policy for the people of the Commonwealth. For example, there has been a tendency, for example, of the hiring of employees as if there's no civil service system in the Commonwealth. Political hires with contracts and all of that. I don't think that's a good idea. I think you should let the civil service system screen employees so that the best qualified candidates are hired for the CNMI government. I think we're doing a disservice to the people of the Commonwealth by doing that.
We've been chatting today with former CNMI Supreme Court Chief Justice Jose S. Dela Cruz about his 2 publications and his personal experience. The books are From Colonialism to Self-Government, the Northern Marianas Experience, and the Fundamental Issues Affecting the Northern Mariana Islands. Justice, I want to thank you so much for your time and your thoughts today. Do you have any closing thoughts before we go?
Catherine, my closing thought is basically this: we are one people. And when I say we are one people, I mean the Chamorros, the Carolinians, and the people of who are permanently residing in the Northern Marianas. Our island consists of is only 44 square miles. The population of the CNMI is only about 50,000 now. It has dropped quite a bit since the days of the garment industry. And it requires us to do some reflection of where we want to go and what we want to do, and how to improve our self-government, and to be more independent in terms of how we finance ourselves. If you get extra money from the federal government through the different federal grants, that's good. But that should not be the answer. We cannot be independent. You cannot be independent if somebody is putting your bills all the time. And so we need to explore different type of industries that are a good fit for the CNMI and would employ the local peoples. We are one people. Let's work together and try to help each other And when we criticize each other, let's not make it personal. Let's make it constructive and not destructive, because we are only hurting ourselves. Let's do something to improve our image in this part of the world, and make it a good, livable place.
Justice, thank you so much for your time, and all the best to you and your family there in Mississippi.
Yeah, thank you very much also. Okay.
Thank you again.
Thank you.
This has been your Humanities Half Hour. I'm Catherine Perry.
This program was supported by a We the People grant awarded to the Northern Marianas Humanities Council from the National Endowment for the Humanities. Any views, findings, conclusions, or recommendations expressed in this program are those of the participants and do not necessarily represent those of the National Endowment for the Humanities or the Northern Marianas Humanities Council.